Hi everyone. Today let's just get into a poem. A poem by James Patrick Kinney, an American poet. But before we get into the poem today, let me just try to tell you a few things about ICSE poems in general. The way they are chosen and why they are chosen for you people. You may have learned or read many poems till class 8. But the ones that you are going to learn in class 9 and 10 are entirely different. They aren't just poems at all, they are lessons for life. Even for stories, the themes are wonderful. The poems are chosen with so much care that the themes they hold can help you in tackling a situation, a difficult situation, or even solve a problem. It adds to your wisdom. In future, you will definitely see the result. It's not just a passing read most of the time. Each poem is a treasure house where you can go deeper and deeper and deeper each time you read it. But only if you get into it. That is the key. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever got into a story or a movie? What does it mean to get into a story or a movie? To get into something like a story or a movie is to feel it, to feel the real essence of that piece of work intended by its maker. That is why when I introduced the poem today, I said, let's get into the poem. I didn't tell you I am going to teach a poem today. Did you notice that? Why did I say that? Because I want all of you to get into the poem rather than just listening to me. If you get into the poem, you will never have to study. Your answers will just start flowing out through your pens because you would have understood its real essence. And one more thing, I don't want you to take notes till we are done with the reading and explanation. We can have a discussion after that and clarify all your questions. So sit back, relax, and let's all try to get into the poem, The Cold Within. The poem Cold Within is an allegory and it beautifully presents a point which we all must think deeply about, especially in the recent times. You know something very important about the present times. These times are really challenging and we should help each other get out of this difficult situation of COVID-19. This poem is actually valid even today. The theme of this poem is actually valid even today. It will be valid till the time there is mankind. So let's think deeply about this poem. It's a prime example of how we injure and deprive ourselves of the good aspects of life just because of our silly prejudices and disappointments. But let's also check if this poem can spark a thought in our minds and help us change our attitudes towards the fellow beings. So we'll go into the first stanza. As I said, sit back, relax and get into the poem for sure. Okay? Okay, into the first stanza now. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each one possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. In the first stanza, the poet introduces us to the situation of the 6 humans. We come to know that 6 humans were trapped by happenstance in a bleak and bitter cold weather. What does happenstance mean? It means by chance, by coincidence. So we come to understand that these 6 humans ended up being in that terrible weather condition by chance. They did not go there on their own. They happened to be trapped there. I'm not really sure if you noticed that the poet doesn't say 6 people. He says 6 humans. Why? Why does he say that? His diction is very important to the overall theme of this poem. By saying 6 humans, he means that they are basically human beings before they are the members of any caste, color, creed or religion. They are human beings who have physical and emotional needs and are susceptible to both hatred and cold. You can also see another curious use of the diction. He says they were trapped by happenstance. As I said, happenstance is by chance or by coincidence, which means an event that might have been accidental. They somehow ended up being there in that bitter cold weather. The poet says they were trapped, and it suggests that they don't want to be there, but they have to be there for the time being, and there is no escape. From the first stanza, we also come to know that all the 6 humans possess a stick of wood. This wood isn't merely a physical object, but is symbolic of a resource or potential that all human beings possess. It is our willingness to use what we have for the sake of others. In the picture, you see a fire burning. Here the poet talks about the stick of wood, as this stick can be used to keep the fire burning till the sun comes up next morning. In the heart of winter, keeping oneself warm is critical to survival. We all know that. Here, each one has something with them to use it for their survival. Unfortunately, the failure on their part to recognize this basic fact becomes a cause of their doom, which we will be seeing in the next few stanzas. The last line of the stanza, "or so the story is told," implies that the speaker has heard it from somewhere else, which he is narrating here. The second stanza now. "Their dying fire in need of logs, the first man held his back, for on the faces around the fire he noticed one was black." The second stanza cuts into a key character in this poem, the dying fire. We know that the situation is really bad, the weather condition is really bad, and the only possibility for survival is to keep the fire burning as long as they can by using the sticks they possessed. They can add it to the fire at regular intervals so that they all can make it to the next morning. The dying fire is actually a silent appeal to the group to help themselves by helping each other. The poet now introduces the first man in the group to us, a white man, a white-skinned man. He looked at others in the group and saw that there was a black man in the group. One look at the black man, that was enough for the white man to decide that he would not use this piece of wood to keep the fire burning. And can you guess why? Why he decided so? It is just because of the presence of the black man there. The white man doesn't wish his stick to be benefiting a black man. What a thought. We see his racist attitude here. We have heard lots about the racial discrimination which was prevalent in many parts of the world during that time. We can see that the white man's racist attitude poisons the mind of his victim, and how this racist attitude of his will boomerang on him later. The white man seems to be forgetting the fact that unless he uses his stick to keep the fire burning, he also may not make it to the next morning. This stanza brings to the fore a literary device of foreshadowing. The dying fire not only represents a particular condition, but also foreshadows the fate of the characters in the poem. One moment it's a dying fire, but the next moment it can be people dying. Let's now move on to the third stanza. "The next man looking across the way saw one knot of his church and could not bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch." Here we meet the second man in the group. Just like the first man, he also looked around and saw that one person in the group did not belong to his church, and he immediately decides not to use his stick of wood as it will benefit that man. He did so because that man did not belong to his religion or beliefs. This man is a religious bigot, plain and simple, and discriminates anybody who doesn't share the same religious views as his. This is bigotry, which speaks of intolerance to a person because they do not share the same opinions or ideas. He seemed to forget that his action can backfire on him too. Moving on to stanza 4 now. The third one sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? A very interesting stanza ahead. In this stanza, we get introduced to the third person in the group. He seems to be a poor man. It might be from his appearance that others could make out that he is poor. It looks like he felt the cold more than others, as we notice that he gives his coat a hitch, maybe to adjust it closer to the body to dry out some warmth from his inadequate clothing. He looks at the rich man in the group, and the next moment he decides not to use his piece of wood to keep the fire burning. What a thought! He considers the rich to be idle and feels that they just get all the comforts of life without working hard. He is basically jealous of the rich man. This poor man is a victim of classism or discrimination based on social or economic class. That means he considers those who are favorably placed than him to be idle. He is defensive, and in his eyes, the rich do not deserve his meager ration, and he will not part with his stick, which will benefit a rich man. Stanza 5. The rich man just sat back and thought of the wealth he had in store and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. Here in this stanza, we get to see an exhibit of apathy, the fourth person, the rich man. We had already heard about him from the poor man. He is least bothered about anything else other than his wealth. His only thought is how he would be able to keep his riches away from the lazy and idle poor. As a result of this prejudice, he too decides to hold back his piece of wood as a poor man will benefit from it. Caught up hoarding his riches in his head, he is oblivious to reality. Like others, he too forgets the fact that he has to use his piece of wood to keep the fire burning, or he also may have to suffer the consequences. It is quite interesting to see that both the rich and the poor keep their firewood to themselves due to the same underlying prejudice. Both consider each other to be lazy and idle folks. This stanza shows how prejudices develop when people are isolated from others who do not belong to the same racial, economic, or religious group that they belong to. And the black man's face bespoke revenge as a fire passed from his side, for all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. Let's now check out what the fifth man is up to. We had heard about him in the first stanza itself. The fifth man is a black man. Being a victim of all racial discrimination all through his life, he thought not putting his stick into the fire was the best revenge he can have on the white-skinned man, thereby giving him a taste of his own medicine, even when he understands that he may also die along with the white man. It is quite amusing to see that a victim is becoming an abuser here. As I mentioned earlier, we have heard lots about the racism that was prevalent in different parts of the world in those days. This black man is a representative of those who suffered the atrocities, and he wants revenge here. Very badly he wants revenge. We may clearly understand that human mind is such a complex thing. Here, the man knows he would also die along with the white man, but he decides to do it just to satisfy his mind, which is craving for revenge. The spark of human kindness is no longer in him, and he chose to let the group die with his action. He would perish, but he is sure to take others with him as well. What a horrible attitude. We met 5 humans as of now, and we can see that all of them, for that matter, use their piece of wood as a tool of retribution and end up becoming a victim of their own hatred. The last man of this forlorn group did not accept for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. The last man, the sixth man. Let's get to know what his thoughts are and why he doesn't use his piece of wood to keep the fire burning. He was a person who never did anything except for gain. He believed only in giving to those who gave something back to him. This was the way he played the game of life. So he too was not ready to part with his stick as no one else had parted with theirs. For the first time in the poem, the poet foreshadows the fate of the group by finally describing the bunch as forlorn and hopeless. Unfortunately, we find that the last person also perpetuates the vicious circle of inertia. The selfishness of the sixth man is also a part of a larger problem. Everybody in this poem seemed to give only to those who give them social approval by belonging to the same class, creed, or color. Their locks held tight in death's chill hands was proof of human sin. They did not die from the cold without, they died from the cold within. The last stanza. So now we know that all the six humans did not wish to part with their stick of wood to keep the fire burning for their own stupid reasons, and we can guess the outcome. They were unable to survive the cold and perished in the end. They were still holding on to their sticks. They failed to help each other because of their prejudices. In fact, they killed each other through inaction. So what has really happened now? How did they all die? This is a question we need to analyze, and when we analyze, we will come to know why the poet has chosen this title, The Cold Within. Let's get to that now. They did not die because of the cold, bitter weather. They did not die because of the cold outside, but they died because of the cold inside them, the cold within them. They could have helped each other survive using their piece of wood, just by throwing their piece of wood into the fire, which would have kept the fire burning till morning. But they did not do it because of the cold in their hearts. They had only hatred, revenge, apathy, all the negative emotions in their hearts. Had they been able to think positively and help each other, they would have made it to the next morning when they could go back to their places. They did not do that. They could not do it because of the cold within. What a world do we live in? This is a thought each of us must be having now. What can we do in order to change the state of affairs? If we change ourselves and our attitudes, we will surely be able to make a difference. So what is the message that the poet is trying to give his readers? Symbolically, the cold within represents hatred and selfishness. The fire represents love and common good. And the firewood they hold is symbolic of the prejudice they have against each other. They must let go their sticks of prejudice and let it burn in the fire of love and fellow feeling if they are to ward off the cold, a harbinger of death, and keep the fire of life burning. However, here they could not overcome the hatred and apathy, and they failed to let go their prejudice, and everybody dies in the end, holding their wood of prejudice. The characters in the poem see the differences between them instead of similarities. These assumed differences result in hatred of the other person, thereby ensuring mutual destruction. Through this poem, The Cold Within, the poet urges all of us to examine the stick of wood that we have with us and throw it into the fire. Our mutual acknowledgement and appreciation of each other's humanity, transcending the narrow confines of class, caste, creed, and color, is the only way that we can keep the fire burning. And with the increasing polarization of modern society, precisely along those faulty lines, it might as well be our last chance to protect our dying fire.